everyone, and welcome to More Dreaming Day 2. We're excited to have you all joining us today. My name is Kelly Ryan, and I'm from Seconte, and I'll be moderating today's session. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping items to cover. Yes, all the sessions are recorded and will be available on demand after the event. We'll also be following up with them via email. Have a question, post it in the Q&A tab here. Tyler will be taking questions throughout the presentation, so make sure you get those questions in early so we can go over them. And then lastly, use the chat. There are emojis, GIFs, and many more things. So we want to hear from you. We want to hear what you're saying and thinking. And then let's go ahead and get started. So I'd like to introduce you to our speaker today, Tyler Durman, who has a great session for us all about designing an effective demand gen funnel and reporting for your SMB. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to him.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelly. I really appreciate the wonderful words and introduction. So, hey, everybody, I'm Tyler Durman. I run a company called Ignition Growth Consulting and have spent more or less my entire career, even before that, working for small businesses, especially startups in the B2B space, especially in technology. So I'm here to share with you today a little bit of what I've learned about building a demand funnel and why it matters and how to think about that for yourself if you're in a B2B selling situation for smaller businesses to eventually grow. So let's jump in and talk about that. As far as the agenda goes, we want to talk about why you need a demand funnel. I'll talk with you a little bit about my story and how it became clear to me why I needed one in the past. How to choose the right version of it for your business, because there's a lot of different things out there. I mean, the reason why I'm talking about this is because it's not easy to figure out just by Googling it. I'll tell you that story. And then defining your funnel stages. So once you actually get your model, how do you make sure it's meaningful to you and your business? You know what to do with it. And then, of course, aligning with your sales team. How do you make sure they know what to do with it when leads are moving through your funnel and you're running campaigns and you need them to follow up with them and convert them into closed deals? So let's get into it. Feel free to drop notes, drop chats. We'll take a couple moments throughout the presentation to pause and talk about what's going on. Happy to answer questions. I love hanging out and engaging with y'all. So back in 2018, I had started my job at Data.World, and I was new to growth marketing. They were an early stage company, small business for sure, had no revenue at the time, and I had been hired to help them build their community product. So they were acquiring people to their data platform where they had data from things like the US Census, NBA statistics, and people were getting together and building things like Tableau visualizations and working together on data projects. And it was really fun. We were seeing really, really cool stuff. But at the end of the day, we were having a hard time converting people from a free user to a paid user at like $12 or $50 a month for a team. And so I remember being there for about 6 months. And then all of a sudden, that dreaded calendar invite comes of, oh no, we have a meeting that's starting in 15 minutes that the entire company's invited to that the CEO called with zero agenda. So what does that mean? That means something's up. We got to talk about it. I mean, I could have thought it's like, okay, great. Despite not having revenue, maybe we're getting bought, but the reality is we need to figure some things out. What do we need to figure out? Well, our CEO laid it out for us and said, hey, this community-focused motion, it's awesome. It's gotten us to where we are. But what we need to do is we need to shift our focus to selling to bigger companies, selling to the enterprise. And I knew in that exact moment that my job was going to change significantly. And I had an opportunity to blaze the trail for us by making us go from a lead generation motion of getting people onto our platform to a demand generation motion of working people through a buying process, educating them along the way about the problems to solve and why we're a good solution for them. So in that situation, we've gone from convincing one person to sign up for a tool to convincing multiple people in a buying process how to think about the problem and how to choose a way to solve it over the course of 3 to 6 to even 12 months, depending on how complex the problem and buying process is. And of course, in our market, we didn't really have real demand for it yet. We had to create the category and create the demand for our product. So this required a rethinking of how we were doing marketing, from just getting people in to a more long-term educational and consultative approach. So that for us made it really clear for me that we needed to build a demand funnel, because that was the way to set the foundation for how to measure our efforts of generating sales pipeline for our sales team. And so what did that look like? How did we do it? Well, first thing I did was a lot of Googling, more or less looked like that. And the thing when you find when you're Googling a bunch of stuff is you find different things. Like probably the most notable, most oftenly found example is the demand waterfall by Forrester, Serious Decisions at the time. If you look at this, especially you see the date on there very clearly, 2006, that demand funnel was very much part of the heyday of inbound marketing. So people are coming to a website, they're submitting an inquiry saying, I want to buy something from you. We qualify them and make sure they work with the right companies, they can work with us. Sales follows up with the leads and accepts them. They qualify them, make sure they have budget, and then they close the business. So that makes sense in a very simple business that's very inbound only, but Data.World at the time had a sales team. And so in addition to looking at the funnel that way, Serious Decisions also evolved from thinking just about inbound or just about marketing to how does marketing work with an outbound selling motion, and also even how do marketing and sales work together with an ABM style motion of doing focused efforts on targeted demand. And so if you look at those different funnels, especially the re-architected one in the middle, that one creates some affordance for both inbound efforts and outbound efforts. So you have SDRs calling on accounts, getting them converted by cold calls, and you have inbound working on using advertising or sponsored events or things like that to get people in the funnel. And that has affordance for tracking them both all the way through it. And then the demand unit waterfall, of course, is focused on you calling your shots, naming the accounts and going after them and trying to activate them, move them through the funnel that way. Each of those makes sense in different situations, but even so, I wasn't completely satisfied with what I found. I did even more Googling. And I realized that everybody out there has an opinion on what the right way to value or measure your marketing efforts for sales are. So, we've got the Serious Decisions model. We've also got stuff from folks like Demand Gen who, in their model, oh, by the way, these slides will be shared later. You'll be able to look more closely if it's hard to see. Their model focuses as much on post-sale as it does on the acquisition of the customer. So they care about is the person a client who is who adopts the product, who expands their account and also creates referrals. The funnel to flywheel model, that's more of what HubSpot thinks about. How do you get all your entire customer experience working together to create a flywheel of value? Reforge is famous for the growth loop model, and this works a lot in product-led growth motions where you've got different growth mechanisms that are running and powering an entire growth machine by their inputs or by their outputs. And so these are all different ways of looking at your world as a marketer, driving value for a business and applying some math to it, because all these things can be put in a spreadsheet or a marketing automation tool. And they're just meant to explain what's marketing doing and how is it getting value to our sales team. So at the end of the day, I realized that there's no such thing as the perfect funnel out there. I needed to take a funnel and adapt it to our needs and to our business. And so for us, we looked at the re-architected demand waterfall and thought that matched our state of the business closest because it had both a inbound and an outbound affordance. So that's my big takeaway for this section. You have to choose the demand funnel that aligns closest with your sales cycle length and your go-to-market complexity for the most accurate measurement. And for us, what that looked like was, we picked the outbound model for the re-architected demand waterfall. And these are more or less my broad recommendations for the other kinds of funnels, like inbound simple funnel with the demand waterfall, ABM for more of a demand unit waterfall. Those make a lot of sense. So, and if anybody has any questions, go ahead and drop them. Otherwise, I will keep on moving. So let's look at once you've actually selected a demand funnel. Like I said, there's no perfect one out there that's just magically going to work for your business. It needs to work, be adapted to and make sense for your business. And what does that mean? Well, at the end of the day, all these things are just ways of explaining how somebody is moving through the prospect journey. So we need to define what every stage in our funnel is. So let's take an example of that with MQL, or marketing qualified lead, a pretty standard thing that we talk about in funnels. So for marketing qualified leads, there are 3 different definitions that I was able to find on what it is. If we look at Tableau's definition, marketing qualified lead is somebody who has indicated interest in a brand through marketing efforts very broadly. So they've done anything with marketing. With Forrester, they think about it as your marketing qualified lead fits your ideal customer profile. They're in your target market. And HubSpot thinks of it as, okay, an MQL is based on digital activity. So they are downloading things, they're filling out forms, they're looking at your site. So all these things are all very different, but they could all be your definition of MQL, that's where it becomes really important to align on your definitions and measurement to make sure that you follow these rules that I found are really important in building funnels. You have to make sure when you're creating the stages of your funnel from one to the next, all throughout your funnel, this definitions need to be clear. So it needs to be very clear what it is. I need to know what it is, and the definition needs to be simple enough for me to understand quickly. The triggering criteria for moving between stages must be binary. So it either is that or it's not that. It's either an MQL or it's not an MQL based on our criteria. And sequential. So MQLs come after leads, and what's after an MQL is an SQL. For example, that could be how you do it. You could do it a million other ways, but what matters is, are your definitions clear? Do we know what they are? Do we know what an MQL is versus an SQL? Is the criteria for an SQL or an MQL very binary and clear? Is it that or is it not? And sequential. It can either be an MQL or an SQL. It can't be both. So if you don't do that, then you have an issue with being able to optimize your funnel, because if you get wishy-washy with your definitions, okay, well, how many did we actually convert? It becomes unclear. And then if it's not clear, then it's not going to be trusted by your leadership or your team. And of course, at the end of the day, all this stuff is it's for making sure that you can accurately value marketing's contribution to sales so that you can go ask for more budget. You can look really good when you're talking about your team's impact and all these, and you have a way to defend yourself if you get asked that dreaded question, hey, what have you done for me lately? Well, here's what that could look like. So for us, when I was at Data.World, this is very similar to the model that we used, where we started at the top with thinking about the buying stages and where we were targeting our accounts. So people who we considered problem aware, so they weren't showing any intent with our Bombora system. We just had them as target accounts, and at the time we were using HubSpot. And then as they showed intent, they moved down to problem aware, and they became a lead if they were converting on forums or attending events that we were sponsoring. And then they would move forward, and we would consider them solution aware and become an MQL when they were converting on forms that were relating to our product area, and they were qualified by our ideal customer profile. As we're getting more data on them, we realized that they were doing more stuff and they were a better fit for us. And then further down, as MQLs would trigger notifications to our SDR team to follow up with them, they would look at them and say, yeah, that's a good lead. I want to talk to that person. And they would follow up with them. That's an SQL. And then further down, when they would book meetings with them, we called them opportunities. That's when the deal process started for us in HubSpot. That was how we built our funnel from A to Z. We made it so that one really couldn't be the next thing except for target accounts with the way it's in HubSpot. But basically from lead to opportunity, we made it really clear what that was and how you could more or less set that up in your system to where you can see the funnel reports from what are your accounts, what are your conversion rates, et cetera. So let's see, any questions at this point for folks? Seems like no, but feel free to jump in and ask, and we'll save some time at the end too. So when we get through this part of the figuring out what your demand funnel looks like, so we've done a lot of the hard work of, okay, we figured out what kinds of funnels are out there. We've picked one that made sense for our business. We defined the stages as we understand our customers' buying journey and started to think about how do we set those up in our marketing automation platform. Now we've got to make sure our sales team understands and is on board with how we engage our leads, what they mean when they get through each funnel stage, and how to address them all the way through there. And so that requires a conversation about SLAs and making sure that they're bought into the way you look at the world. Guess what? If you don't, it's really easy to get into a finger pointing exercise of like, hey, we gave you tons of leads. What happened? Oh, they weren't that great. They weren't that qualified anyway. Wait, you didn't tell us that. How do we figure that out and get ahead of that next time? You want to avoid those kinds of conversations. You want to have them at the beginning, not after the fact when you've thrown a bunch of stuff over the fence and you're like, okay, did you catch it? No, because you have to have that conversation first. And so I know I'm preaching to the choir here. I know a lot of folks understand how important it is to engage with your sales team, but what I'm here to share with you is, number one, it's important. It's important to continue doing that. Number two, here are some tips that I've learned, especially as a former salesperson before I got into marketing. I was an SDR too, so I knew a lot about how to work with leadership and also other SDRs to help them understand why we wanted to work with them on this and make sure it worked. So my number one trick for working with salespeople is speak their language, which is tell them what's in it for them, because they're working with prospects and clients all day, trying to make sure that what we're doing explains how do we solve their problem, how do we make sure that they're getting what they need out of our product. And so for VPs, CROs, sales leadership, sales management, they're concerned about things like, how do we make sure deals are closing faster? How do we make sure we're getting more of the right ones in? How do we make sure they are at the right deal size? We're getting the right logos. How do we make sure we hit our number and have 3x pipeline coverage? So a lot of what my talk track focuses on is, hey, we want to make sure we're focusing on the right folks that move through faster, get us our target deal size. So that's why I really need your help in making sure we nail down these definitions and we nail down the SLAs for the team so that we address these deals the right way and get them through. For account executives, the same thing, because there's always folks that'll come through and be like, okay, well, yeah, I've got this awesome hot opportunity coming in, but also like it's not the best fit. It's not like it's not quite what we need. It's not quite in our ICP, but they really want to buy. Maybe that's the right thing to do. Maybe that's a great bluebird that's coming in. But generally speaking, we don't want folks wasting time on bad opportunities, right? Especially not when, you got money to make, you got a quota to hit. So I want the account executives focused on what are the right deals that are going to close on time and get us the target deal size we want. And then for SDRs, of course, being a former SDR, the number one thing I wanted to get paid. I wanted to close a lot of meetings that would then convert into qualified pipeline. And then that was pretty much it. I wanted to hit my quota. So it's like, hey, call these people, work these leads, because they're warm. They know who we are. They're more likely to take a meeting with us. So those are the folks you should talk to. Those are basically the ways that I would explain to the sales folks, hey, this is why we should work together. Now, the things that you want to get their input on are things like, hey, let's make sure we understand what is a qualified lead. When you talk to a lead, are they kicking tires? Are they very knowledgeable about the field and the category? You want to listen to them and their experience so that you incorporate their knowledge effectively. So it's like, oh, okay, well, maybe healthcare industry makes a lot more sense than focusing on technology, because healthcare folks acutely feel the problem. So we want to rank them higher in our ICP scoring criteria and our lead scoring. Or maybe it's we never want to sell to certain organizations because there's just too much regulation. We're going to get bogged down and we don't have enough time to sell them. Listen to your sales team's input, because they're having those conversations and figuring that stuff out every single day, so that you can take that and incorporate that straight into your systems and criteria so that they're confident in the leads they get and they follow up with them and they close them. And of course, the way you continue to have this conversation with them makes them feel like they have some ownership of it. When you're taking their feedback and incorporating it appropriately, they will feel like they've been listened to, and they will more likely respect the definitions and the leads that you bring them, because they've gotten some input. And also, my last tip on working with sales folks to get their buy-in is, often this conversation can't be resolved in just one conversation unless you're just super lucky and you know everything you need to know about the market. So for us, it took several weeks to have the conversation of, okay, here's what our funnel should look like. Here's what everybody should be doing. How do we operationalize this and make it so that it's in our system and that everybody knows what to do? Everybody's getting notified. It took weeks. So it's okay to be patient and to stick with it and make sure that you're getting to the right outcome for getting your funnel implemented, set up, and then getting leads converted through it with your sales team. So now that we have done everything we needed to do, we've gotten our funnel built, we've worked with our sales team and implemented it. What do? We got to start running campaigns. So the game now becomes, instead of building and setting things up, we start running campaigns, driving leads through the funnel, increasing counts of each of those stages, increasing conversion rates, tracking attribution to see what's working at converting from one stage to the next, what worked to bring that lead in, what worked to create that deal. And then you're just playing a game of, okay, we're going to try things, see if they worked. We'll double down on what works. We'll try to fix what doesn't, or we'll just move on and stop doing it. So that's where things really get fun, as you really get to start doing more growth marketing, demand gen stuff, rather than being in the tools, being in the conversations, doing the hard things of working this stuff out. It's all hard at the end of the day, but this is where the fun stuff is for me, is actually getting out there and running campaigns, meeting the market where it is. So we are getting close to wrapping up our session. I wanted to give you a quick recap of everything we've talked about. For me, you need a demand funnel to be able to effectively measure your marketing efforts for a B2B context. That requires selecting your funnel, make sure you do the research, find the right one for you. Then you make those definitions airtight by making the criteria clear, binary, and sequential, so that your stages are very airtight and make sure everybody knows what they are and they're well implemented in your system. And then you make sure you include sales through the process, lock arms with them, and make sure that they understand what to do at every stage and that they know what to expect from you. So I hope that's been educational and interesting. I'm very thankful for our incredible sponsors that have brought on Mardreamin. They're really cool people here. Make sure to engage with everybody. And thank you for hanging out and joining with me. I'd love to take some questions. This QR code goes to my LinkedIn profile, so please connect with me there and let's take some questions and talk. Thank you.
Tyler, I learned a lot. Loved all the old funnels. That brought back some weird memories. So glad you tracked those all down.
Thank you.
Couple questions. When you're talking about lining up with sales, making sure you're locking arms, how often are you meeting with them? And then do you have these sort of training resources or documentation that you present or share with them?
Yes, great question. So at the beginning of the process, I'm usually meeting with them pretty often, like usually on a weekly basis of, hey, here's what we're thinking. Does this make sense or match with what your understanding of the market is? And as time goes on, as you've implemented and started scaling your marketing efforts from your funnel, that process will spread out to quarterly and then maybe a half year, because as the business grows, as it gets more stable, especially in a small business context, things don't need to change that much unless there's something wrong or our business is changing significantly, like maybe our criteria or our customers need to change for ICP. So that conversation can happen quarterly rather than weekly, or maybe even every half year. And as far as training resources go, usually what that looks like is I'll crash the sales all hands and give a training for what that looks like. What does every stage of the funnel mean? How does it matter to you? What do you do at this stage? Who's involved? Are SDRs or AEs involved? And then also I'll give them the presentation in the deck, give them a quick Loom video recording of that thing too, and try to make it as easy as possible for them to follow up when it comes to implementing in their or following up and being implemented in their systems. So do as much as you can is more or less what I'm saying.
Yeah, great advice for sure. Always like crashing those events.
Yeah.
Lots of good insights. Everybody's really appreciative of it. We have a question that says, what if you don't have opportunities in Salesforce? How do you work with those to get through this process?
Yeah, and so opportunities in Salesforce, as in not having people create deals and opportunities in Salesforce, is that right?
Yeah, so it could be salespeople kind of going rogue, or maybe they have an Excel sheet that they share amongst the team, so we don't have that data easily available.
Oh, that's a tough one. So usually in those kinds of situations, it's always a difficult thing to try to get salespeople to conform to a process that requires data entry, not talking to customers. And you always want to minimize that too, because they're there to close deals. They're not there to play around in our tools like Salesforce or whatever. So at the end of the day, I think what we need to do is find that solution in the middle of what's the minimum viable thing that they can and need to do to be able to get that data so that we can track on it and report on it to the board and to our leadership. So depending on Salesforce specifically, I'm less of an expert in the Salesforce ecosystem, but I generally want all this stuff together in the same platform where we know who the leads are, we know what the MQLs and SQLs are, and then we know which of those turn into deals. So if we have all that together, then we can create that report that will then show our leaders, hey, how's the funnel doing? If we don't, then we need to have conversations with leadership, both above and at the sales leadership level, to say, hey, this may not feel important now, but this is going to be important later, where we need to be able to show A to Z what's everybody doing to convert and bring in deals. We need your support in making sure the team adopts this process, and we're going to make it as easy as possible, but we need your help. I think that's the right conversation to have.
Yeah, I agree. Just find that minimum available effort that the sales team has and make sure you're having those conversations to know how important it is to get the data in one platform or one source of truth bucket.
Exactly right.
Okay, another question about funnels here. Some people have an overweight SAL stage in the funnel. how do you reassign or get those to be passed back, or how do you kind of reduce that funnel?
Yeah. So as far as that part goes, I think it depends on how they got there. So is it that what's happening? How do we get so many people into the SAL part of the funnel? Is it that our sales team isn't busy enough and they're going over leads that aren't quite ready and they're just picking them up and putting them down? Is it that they are these leads are hot and then they move on, or maybe they're just kicking tires? I think it's important to figure out why there's so many folks that are showing up in the SAL stage, diagnose that, and then try to choke that off up funnel a little bit if it's really a they're not ready issue. If it's a Salesforce product or salespeople productivity issue, maybe there's other things we can focus them on, or maybe there's things we can do to give them ways to pass people back, or we can proactively surface those things to them and say, hey, you haven't touched this lead in a month. It looks like they're not really ready. Can we pull them back and move them back into the SQL stage or MQL, wherever you'd like to put them? And so I think it requires a little bit of management for them, because again, salespeople are there to try to get things going, try to close. In a situation where they just have a bunch of stuff hanging out, I think it makes sense to examine why they're there and then do our best to help them get those folks to the right place.
Kind of related to that, do you have a time frame where you would take away a sales lead to then give it back to marketing or something?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think generally speaking, when I want my sales team engaged is when people are showing intent. So they're doing research in our category, or they are actively showing intent for our buying motion and saying, hey, I want to buy. In our case, it was a data catalog. I'm looking for data catalog software. Yes, you need to talk to a salesperson right now. But if they're further up funnel, like they just showed up to one of our virtual events, or they are filling out forms for Gartner reports or white papers, that's not necessarily indicating intent. They're indicating interest in our broader category further up the funnel. So if a salesperson is reaching out to that kind of person, I'm more likely to faster want to pull them back and not have them be so focused on them. But if it's somebody that's really hot and warm, I don't just want them to own that person and try to stay after them. I also want them to go after the rest of the account and say like, hey, there's clearly something going on. There's a buying initiative. How do we get in there and figure out what's going on and see if we can join the party if they're actively looking at different vendors? So it's a little bit of a case-by-case basis, but on a timeline basis, I think for really hot leads, I want them to stick with them for at least a couple weeks to a month. For leads that are not so hot, maybe a little bit on the up funnel side, they can hang out for a little while, like maybe a couple months to a quarter, and then we'll do kind of a recycle cleanup at the end of the quarter where we say, hey, do you want these? Yes or no? Okay, if not, we'll pull them back out and do more nurture and more focused campaigns.
Perfect. I love that. Kind of with the timing question, how often are you reviewing the funnel or potentially changing that process? Is that more like a quarterly check-in and then potentially chain at the end of the year, or what does that look like to you?
Yeah, so I think you're looking at it as a marketing team. Once it's set up and once you're humming, once you're running campaigns, you're looking at it every quarter to make sure it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. Are your conversion rates more or less where you want them to be? And is there any big opportunity for improvement? Then you go make those choices, you make those moves. But usually on a leadership, like broader level, at the end of the year is when a lot of planning gets done. So that's often when you get all the leadership in the room and say, hey, what's really working, what's not working when it comes to marketing stuff coming in and sales team follow-up? Can that be applied to our funnel? Are we getting too many of the wrong leads in? Are we not spending enough time focusing on a particular vertical that's closed recently? Those conversations can be had at those big planning sessions, and then the adjustments can be made shortly after to be reflected in the next year for how does your funnel work. So I think actually probably right now is the right time to start having that conversation if you're in that situation.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, thanks, Tyler. That was great. If anyone has any
Awesome.
other questions, we have about a minute left. Otherwise, we just have a big thank you to our sponsors. Thank you so much for attending today. Be sure to follow Tyler on LinkedIn here. Ask any other questions that might pop up. He's happy to help you all.
Absolutely. Yeah. Last call for questions, but yeah, I'll be on LinkedIn for sure. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.